Hey, Diddy choked the man out. He was placed in solitary confinement yesterday, July 23rd, around 4 o'clock p.m. And he'll be there for at least 30 days.
30 days locked down, alone, no escape. But that's just the beginning. The man who threw parties that shook the entire industry, the mogul who controlled rooms, the icon who shaped stars. Now he's waking up to knives at his throat, fighting for his life in a federal prison dorm. But Joe Rogan and Katt Williams just dropped something that changes everything. This isn't about crime and punishment anymore. This is about whether Sean Combs survives the next 4 years inside those walls. And what we're about to break down will show you exactly why everyone from the streets to Joe Rogan himself thinks he might not make it out alive. When Diddy first landed at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, nobody thought it would get this dark this fast. This wasn't some minimum security country club prison. This was a federal lockup where every sound bounces like a threat and every corner holds a blade. The overcrowding was severe. Chaos was the baseline. And within days, reality hit him like a sucker punch. Think about that for a second. The first real encounter inside wasn't some philosophical debate or a business negotiation. It was violence. Raw, primal, immediate. This set the entire tone for what was coming. Folks who've been through the federal system know the rules aren't written down. They're felt. Respect is currency. Weakness is a sentence. And celebrity status? That's a target, not a shield. They moved him to FCY Fort Dix thinking lower security meant safer ground. Wrong calculation. Inmates started testing him immediately. They looked at this man who'd spent decades controlling studios, controlling artists, controlling narratives, and they saw something different now. They saw a dude surrounded by rumors that maybe he'd forgotten how to handle himself. Maybe the money and the fame had softened him. Maybe he'd become a target after all.
People think that they can play with him, and I don't know if it's because of all of the reporting around the case or if it's because he's a big celebrity and, you know, they think that he's used to being, like, protected. But I was told people think that they can play with him, and we've told people don't think that.
But here's what Joe Rogan was hinting at that most people missed. Diddy had to prove something to himself in prison that he thought he'd already proven decades ago, that he wasn't soft, that he could stand. So when the confrontation happened, when an inmate started running his mouth, probably referencing the legal documents, probably poking at old rumors, Diddy's response was instant, physical, explosive.
Got a phone call yesterday that Diddy was placed in solitary confinement because he beat up a man.
30 days, 4 walls, no windows, no contact. Just the sound of your own thoughts and the knowledge that you had to get physical to survive in that environment. That's the kind of psychological pressure that compounds every single day you're locked in there. And Joe wasn't sparing any details when he talked about what came next.
Diddy grab people, yoke people up in clubs, like with security there. Diddy's no sucker.
The fact that Joe felt he had to defend Diddy's toughness tells you something critical. The narrative was already shifting. The image was cracking. People were starting to wonder if the man they knew from the free world could actually hold it together inside prison walls. Now the solitary confinement footage was shocking, but what came after shook Katt Williams and Joe Rogan in a way that made the knife attack look like a warm-up. The video leaked of Diddy looking drastically different, thinner, drained. The streets didn't waste time speculating about diet talk or fitness regimens. They went straight to something heavier.
According to you, the inmates are fighting over making his bed.
Yep, well, really, according to Lisa Evers, I want to give her.
This detail matters because it reveals the social dynamic inside the dorm. He wasn't isolated by choice. He was surrounded by a culture that developed around proximity to him. Inmates competing for his attention. Inmates positioning themselves. That kind of environment is a breeding ground for exactly what the streets started whispering about. The word came back: HIV, an acute STD spread through unsafe contact in a facility where protection doesn't exist and impulse control is a luxury nobody can afford. This wasn't just gossip. This was a pattern, and both Joe and Katt locked onto it hard. Because here's what people don't understand about his history in the free world. For decades, the industry had been talking about Diddy's private circles, the parties, the events, the freak-offs, as the charges called them, the lack of boundaries, the absence of any safety protocols, 1,000 bottles of lubricant, 0 protection. That wasn't an accident. That was intentional infrastructure built to facilitate something specific. And if that's how things operated in his penthouses and private estates, with resources and access to anything he wanted, what happens when he's confined in a federal dorm with 20 other men and 0 control? The pattern didn't disappear when he walked through those prison gates. If anything, it accelerated. The desperation to maintain status, the relationships, the seeking of comfort in an environment designed to strip all comfort away. The vulnerability combined with what the streets say was reckless behavior. Katt Williams and Joe both pointed at the leaked footage and said the same thing. This man is not just in prison. He's in a pressure cooker where every layer of protection from the outside world just evaporated.
Constant lockdown, constant stabbing. They are like very, very, very high in the strict on respect.
That testimony from someone who's been through the federal system wasn't just describing conditions, it was showing the comparison. In prison, respect isn't negotiated, it's earned or enforced. And when you're dealing with health rumors, with isolation, with the weight loss that comes from stress and fear, that's when survival becomes a real question. Then came the news that changed everything. Clive Davis was gone. The man, the legend, the music industry titan who shaped entire eras, dead at 94 years old. For Diddy, this wasn't just sad news, this was catastrophic.
Legendary record executive Clive Davis has died.
See, the relationship between Clive and Diddy ran deeper than what's in any biography. According to Street Talk and industry insiders, Clive had been the gatekeeper who opened doors that young Diddy couldn't open himself. But more than that, Clive had been working angles from the outside since the federal charges dropped. He was coordinating with lawyers, he was talking to Diddy's mother, he was pressing buttons. He was the lifeline.
Mr. Davis, you're a major influence on the career of P. Diddy. Have you spoken to him since the federal raid?
Notice what happened when reporters asked him directly. Clive said nothing, just silence. But people who know how the industry operates understood exactly what that silence meant. Clive was handling things behind closed doors, quietly, strategically.
What do you make of the allegations against P. Diddy?
Clive protecting him by saying nothing at all. That's how power works at that level. You don't defend publicly, you defend privately. You work the system, you coordinate appeals, you prepare for early release, and then suddenly, that disappeared forever. When Diddy got the call that Clive was dead, the facility locked down. What happened next? The leaked video showed a man completely breaking down. Not just sad, wailing. The kind of crying that comes when you realize your last real lifeline just snapped. This wasn't about losing a mentor. This was about losing the one person on the outside who had the power, the connections, and the motivation to maneuver his release. Without Clive, there's no one making calls to judges. There's no one coordinating with lawyers at that level. There's no one with that kind of capital working on his behalf. And then the abandonment started in real time. Other celebrities who'd been in those circles, who'd benefited from those connections, who'd attended those events, they started running publicly, loudly, unambiguously. Meek Mill went on record to say he had nothing to do with Diddy. Not, "I wasn't at those parties." Not, "I heard rumors." He said, "I don't have to do with Puffy. I ain't nowhere near no damn freak off." And the streets noticed. People were calling out the abandonment in real time on social media. They saw the pattern. The moment the legal pressure became real, the moment Clive died and couldn't protect him anymore, the moment his release looked uncertain, that's when the people who were once close to him started publicly distancing themselves. Will Smith did the same thing. "I got nothing to do with Puff." Other names in his circle went quiet or disappeared.
When you first get there, when I first got to the USP, the first thing they hint me when I came out there, he said, "Hey, what's up, Trey?" He like, "Man, look, come on in my room, bro." I said, "What's up, man? Keep this knife on you." Everybody got one.
Inside prison, you're surrounded by knives and threats. Outside prison, your support system is evaporating. That's the vice tightening. That's the pressure from every direction. And Joe Rogan was connecting these dots out loud, saying this is exactly the kind of combination that could end him. But it got darker, because while Diddy was processing Clive's death and the abandonment from his circle, new lawsuits started dropping, new testimony, new evidence. Adria English came forward with her story. She was a go-go dancer at his white parties in the early 2000s, young, hungry, believing she was getting an opportunity in the industry.
My name is Adria Cherie Marcy English, and I was hired in the early 2000s to be a go-go dancer at Diddy's private white parties.
She described what happened next in testimony that was detailed and devastating.
After about the second or third party is when I got asked to do extra things more than dancing at the private white parties. It was more mingling more and being available if they wanted to participate in extras.
The terminology was clinical, but the reality was harsh. Young women being integrated into private circles, being put in situations escalating, control increasing.
Probably over 20 in all the parties. I did hear that when they did the raid on the house, that the tapes that he found, that I may be on them.
There were tapes recorded without clear consent, evidence of activities, and that evidence was in federal custody now. April Lampro came forward with allegations going back to the 1990s, claims of assault at bars, at hotels, at studios, claims of coercion dressed up as opportunity, claims backed by detailed accounts that matched patterns other women were describing. This testimony was playing out in real time, while Diddy was sitting in a federal prison getting thinner, dealing with health rumors, processing the loss of his protector, and facing 30 days in solitary solitary for the attack that proved he still had aggression in him. The tapes that the federal raids found weren't just going to disappear, they were evidence. They were going to be used in court, they were going to be shown to judges, and they were going to reset everything he'd accomplished by claiming to be reformed. His team had put out a narrative. Diddy's sober now. He's working in the prison laundry unit. He's completed rehabilitation programs. He's staying out of trouble. His release date is moving up. April 15th, 2028 is looking more real. But then the tapes started resurfacing in different contexts. Old footage, new interpretations, and one name kept showing up that shocked everyone who saw it. Justin Bieber. Diddy bragging, publicly, on record, about spending 48 hours alone with a 13-year-old kid who just signed to the industry, calling it every young person's dream, and then saying, we can't really disclose what they did. That's not protecting a protege. That's strategically coded language about something darker. Bieber talking years later about the emotional toll, about not knowing who to trust, about people telling him they loved him and then disappearing, about seeing things in that industry that he couldn't unsee, about wishing he could protect others from the same environment. That clip was everywhere by this point in the narrative. Connecting back to Diddy, raising questions, and sitting in a federal prison, Diddy knew exactly what these resurfacing clips meant. They meant any chance of early release was getting slimmer by the day. His lawyers were filing appeals based on acquitted conduct and technicalities, but the jury of public opinion, the judges reviewing tapes, the federal prosecutors seeing new evidence from raids, they were all looking at a different picture now. Now here's where it gets dangerous, and this is what Joe Rogan and Katt Williams were really hinting at. Cassie had taken the stand. She'd looked directly at him in the courtroom and testified about control, abuse, physical violence, the hotel hallway footage where his hands went on her, the text messages about freak-off events, the blackmail concerns because everything was recorded. She described the systematic control, the tracking, the monitoring, the force, the threat. This wasn't just testimony, this was snitching in the way that street rules understand snitching. She laid out the operation, she described the tactics, she became a witness against him at trial, and Joe Rogan made something very clear about what that means. In prison, you have time to think. You have time to remember who testified against you, you have time to plan. And if you get out, if you walk free, that's when debts get paid. But that created a secondary layer of fear, because people who testified, people who'd exposed him, people who'd put names and faces and details on the record, they understood the risk. They understood that if Diddy survived prison and got released, the first thing he'd do is look for payback. That's where Big Hammy came in, Diddy's old bodyguard, the man who'd been inside the circle, the man who knew where the bodies were buried, literally and figuratively, the man who started talking loudly on podcasts, exposing payoffs, exposing parties, exposing the whole apparatus. He left the country, not because of random fear, because he knew Diddy was a threat to him, and he wasn't taking chances. Big Hammy was literally living in exile to avoid retaliation from a man locked inside a federal prison. That's how real the threat was perceived. And then there's Katt Williams, the man who'd been calling out industry corruption for years, the comedian who turned down massive money multiple times to keep his integrity. He'd gone on record saying Diddy tried to pull him into the mess, and Katt said no. Katt was being loud about it, exposing the pattern, and he wasn't hiding that he believed Diddy might come for him too once he got out. So now pause for a second and absorb what Joe Rogan was really laying out. In prison, Diddy has nothing but time. Time to remember who testified, time to remember who talked, time to remember who profited from his fall. And if he survives, if he gets released, there's genuine fear about what he'd do on the outside. But here's the darker inversion of that logic that Joe was hinting at. What if some of those people don't want to wait for him to get out? What if the threat gets handled before he walks free? The streets had already started whispering about it. The combination of Diddy being a threat to multiple powerful people, combined with him being isolated and weakened in prison, combined with him having fewer real allies on the outside now, it created a scenario where his survival wasn't guaranteed. And the continues part was key. The attacks, the isolation, the health rumors, the new lawsuits, the resurfacing tapes, the witnesses testifying, the abandonment by his circle, Clive gone, support evaporating, enemies multiplying. All of that continued pressure in an environment where you're already fighting for survival. That's what breaks people. That's what kills people. Joe wasn't saying it was a sure thing. He was saying the combination of factors created a genuine risk scenario. And Katt wasn't disagreeing. So where does that leave us? A man who once controlled entire rooms is now in a room with 20 other men where survival is a daily calculation. A man who operated through leverage and connections is now isolated, with his main protector dead and his circle abandoning him. A man who built an empire on creating situations he could control is now in a situation he cannot control. Did he learn the game from Clive Davis and the circles around him? Absolutely. Were those circles built on exploitation and recklessness? The tapes and the testimony suggest yes. Is he now facing the consequences of that same system in an inverted way, where the lack of protection becomes the punishment? That's what the streets are saying. Will he survive the 4 years until his scheduled release? Joe Rogan and Katt Williams both left that question hanging, not because they don't know the answer, but because the answer depends depends on factors beyond Diddy's control now. The attacks could continue. The isolation extends. The health rumors could be accurate. The new lawsuits could extend his sentence. The witnesses could keep talking. The tapes could keep surfacing. And the people who fear him, who he harmed, who he exploited, they might decide that silence is more valuable than his survival. Or maybe he makes it out. Maybe the appeals work. Maybe the narrative shifts. Maybe time does something unexpected. But if you're in a federal prison dorm surrounded by knives, losing weight visibly, dealing with solitary confinement, processing the loss of your main protector, facing new charges from new accusers, isolated from allies who once claimed loyalty, and knowing that multiple people have motivation to make sure you don't get another chance to hurt them, that's not a scenario where survival is obvious. That's the point Joe Rogan and Katt were making when they reacted to those leaked prison videos. Not this guy's guilty, not this guy deserves it, but this guy might not make it out alive. And in an industry built on secrets, connections, and people protecting their interests, that's the real threat sitting behind prison walls right now.